My wife filed for divorce after my father died, thinking she was entitled to half of the inheritance. The divorce papers were sitting on the kitchen counter next to a sympathy card that still had the funeral home's name printed on the envelope. My father had been dead for 11 days. My wife had been planning this for 11 days too. Those are not unrelated facts. My name is Daniel Pierce. I'm 47 years old, married to a woman named Kristen for 16 years. We have two kids, Owen, 14, and Maya, 11. On a Tuesday morning in September, I found those papers before I'd even had coffee. Before I'd even had a chance to grieve my own father properly. I need to walk you through exactly how this happened because the timing is the whole story. My father, Gordon Pierce, died on a Friday afternoon. Heart failure, sudden, no warning, 79 years old, and gone in the time it took my mother to walk from the garden back into the kitchen. I got the call at work. I remember standing in the parking lot of a supply warehouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma, phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark, my mother's voice shaking apart on the other end. I drove home in a fog. Kristen met me at the door, she hugged me, she said the right words, "I'm so sorry, Daniel, whatever you need." I believed every syllable of it. The funeral happened the following Thursday. Kristen sat beside me in the front pew, dressed in black, her hand resting on my knee the entire service. I remember being grateful for that hand. I remember thinking, at least I'm not doing this alone. Here's what I didn't know. 2 days after the funeral, Kristen called her sister, Paula, a paralegal at a family law firm in Oklahoma City. I found this out later through Paula's own guilt, which I'll get to. Kristen asked Paula one specific question. If Daniel inherits from his father's estate during our marriage, and we later divorce, how much of that inheritance would I be entitled to? Paula told her the truth. Inheritance is typically separate property, not marital property unless it gets commingled, deposited into joint accounts, used to buy things titled jointly, mixed in ways that blur the line. Paula also told her something else, something Kristen apparently didn't want to hear. If you file before any of that commingling happens, you'd likely get nothing from it directly. But you need to move fast and you need him not to know you're asking. 11 days after my father's death, I found divorce papers on my kitchen counter. I stood there holding them, coffee not yet made, kids not yet awake for school, and I read through pages of legal language that boiled down to one devastating fact. Kristen wasn't leaving because our marriage had broken. She was leaving because she thought my father's money was about to become mine, and she wanted a claim staked before I understood what was happening. Kristen, I called upstairs. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She came down in her robe, saw the papers in my hand, and her face did something I will never forget. Not shame, calculation, like she was recalculating whether the papers should have stayed hidden one more day. "We need to talk," she said. "We're talking now," I said. "Explain this to me. My father's body is barely in the ground and you filed for divorce." She sat down at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and gave me an answer so clinical it barely sounded human. "Daniel, our marriage has had problems for a long time, you know that. I just think it's better to handle things now cleanly before things get complicated." Complicated how? She didn't answer that directly. That silence answered it for her. I want to tell you, I confronted her right then with everything I'd eventually learn. I didn't because I didn't know it yet. All I knew, standing in that kitchen, was that my wife of 16 years had chosen the 11th day after my father's death to end our marriage, and something about the timing sat wrong in my stomach like swallowed glass. I didn't sign anything. I told her I needed time, packed a bag and drove to my mother's house instead, needing somewhere to actually grieve without legal paperwork sitting on the counter. My mother, Ruth, took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. She just made tea and sat with me at her kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid. "Your father left everything organized," she said eventually gently, testing whether I wanted to talk business or just sit in silence. He worked with a lawyer, Frank Delgado, 3 years ago, updated everything, said he wanted to make sure his hard work didn't get wasted. I didn't think much of that comment at the time. I was too busy grieving, too busy replaying 16 years of marriage, looking for the moment it had become something transactional instead of real. The discovery came 4 days later, and it came from an unexpected source. Paula, Kristen's own sister, called me directly. Her voice was shaking. "Daniel, I need to tell you something, and Kristen's going to hate me for it, but I can't stay quiet anymore." She told me everything. The phone call 2 days after the funeral. The question about inheritance and marital property. The advice to file fast before any commingling happened. "I told her I couldn't in good conscience help her plan around your father's death like that," Paula said, "but she found someone else at the firm to walk her through it instead. Daniel, she wasn't leaving you. She was leaving your father's money before it was even legally yours yet." I sat with that phone against my ear for a long time after Paula hung up, feeling something shift from grief into something colder, clearer. Here's the twist. The one nobody saw coming, not even Kristen. 3 days later, I sat down with Frank Delgado, my father's attorney, to go over the estate details I'd been too numb to focus on properly before. Frank pulled out the will, walked me through it line by line, and then paused on a section I hadn't fully absorbed at the funeral reception when he'd briefly mentioned it. "Daniel, your father restructured his estate planning 3 years ago after a conversation the two of you apparently had about your marriage." I stared at him. "What conversation?" Frank checked his notes. "He mentioned you'd confided in him that things with Kristen felt strained, that you were worried about where things were headed. He didn't want to interfere in your marriage directly, but he also didn't want his life's work handed to someone who might not stay in your life. So he set up a trust instead of a direct inheritance. Fully in your name, protected from any marital claims regardless of commingling, with specific language excluding any spouse, current or future, from any claim on the trust assets under any circumstances, including divorce." I sat there stunned, remembering that conversation with my father 3 years earlier, a quiet moment on his back porch where I'd admitted for the first time that Kristen and I had been fighting more than usual. I hadn't thought much of it since. My father apparently had thought about it constantly. "He protected it," I said slowly. "3 years ago, before any of this happened." Frank nodded. "He told me, and I'm reading his exact words here from my notes at the time, 'I've watched my son work himself half to death for that family. Whatever happens with his marriage, I want to make sure nobody can just walk in and take half of what he's owed because of a piece of paper.'" My father saw this coming 3 years before I did. The confrontation with Kristen happened the following week, at Frank's office with her own lawyer present. She'd expected, based on Paula's initial advice before Paula backed out, that there would be significant marital assets tied up in whatever I eventually inherited. Instead, Frank calmly explained the trust structure, the exclusionary language, the 3-year-old protections my father had quietly built specifically because of a conversation about our marriage that Kristen never even knew had happened. Her face went through several transformations in that office. Confusion first, then anger. Then finally, something that looked almost like fear, as the reality settled in that the divorce she'd rushed to file, hoping to secure a claim before anything got finalized, had actually accomplished nothing except exposing exactly why she'd filed it. "You planned this with him," she said to me, voice sharp. "No," I said. "He planned it 3 years ago because you'd already shown him who you were and I was too in love to see it yet." She didn't have a response to that. The divorce proceeded, but not the way Kristen had calculated. Without any marital claim to the trust, and with our other joint assets divided fairly under standard Oklahoma law, she walked away with considerably less than she'd been counting on when she filed those papers 11 days after my father's funeral. 6 months later, the dust settled into something quieter, sadder, but honest. Owen and Maya split time between two households now, a reality I hate but have made peace with because kids deserve stability even when their parents' marriage didn't survive. I still visit my father's grave most Sundays. I sit there sometimes and just talk to him, the way you do when someone's gone but their voice still echoes clearly enough in your memory that conversation feels almost possible. You saw it coming, I told him once, sitting on the grass beside that headstone. 3 years before I did. I wish you'd told me directly instead of just quietly protecting me from a distance. But then I think about who my father was, a man who spent his whole life fixing things quietly, without fanfare, without ever needing credit. He didn't warn me about Kristen directly because he knew I needed to reach that truth myself in my own time. What he could control, he controlled. He protected what mattered before he ever knew exactly how badly it would be needed. 11 days. That's how long my wife waited after burying my father before deciding his death was an opportunity rather than a loss. In 3 years, that's how long my father had already been quietly working to make sure that opportunity would amount to nothing at all. In the end, it wasn't revenge that protected me. It was love, arriving early, working silently in the background long before I even knew I'd need it.